Jim Benning had a press conference on Friday. It was full of excuses. I've listened to it twice now. So I've wasted about an hour and 15 minutes of my life hearing Jim Benning talk. I don't know about you guys, but listening to it, I just felt there was just excuses. The lack of practicing. I don't recall Travis Green ever giving that excuse, by the way. I remember him saying that, oh yeah, this team spent money because the Canucks did not on the offseason because they couldn't. There was the excuse of playing every second night. Now, I do believe the Canucks have played the most games of anyone in the league, but still, everyone is dealing with that right now. And there's some news tidbits that we can talk about as we get there, but and we're going to get to the quote about the competitiveness in 2 years in a second here. But just when Benning talks about the start of the season itself, I want to get your guys' thoughts on this because it just feels like at this point, I don't know why Jim Benning is getting the okay to talk. And also it feels like he was not prepared to answer any of those questions.
You said something very important there. You brought the two things that you listed as excuses. Every other team in this league is dealing with the exact same thing. I get he's played two more. They've played two more games than the second most team, right? They've played 28. I believe Toronto's played 26. But practice is still an issue. Like training camp, who had training camp? I don't know. Like he's the excuse. I mean, Kyle Dubas can come out and say this. Mark Bergevin can come out and say this if your team's losing. Where's the accountability here? We talked about accountability with Mike Babcock, Jim Benning, accountability, because it's not good enough to say I ran out of time. No, you didn't. You had plenty of time.
What's funny is so they asked him about that in the press conference, obviously. And he's like, oh, it was simplified. And it's like, dude, no, it wasn't. That's another thing of just not thinking about when he's talking here. And what's interesting about this is, so he mentioned that they want to re-sign Travis Green. Obviously, you should want to do that. And he talked about the financial stuff makes it difficult right now, so they're looking towards more the end of the season. And Daniel, don't you just get a little nervous that running out of time, and you're this incredibly important coach is the one who needs a contract? Meanwhile, who's going to replace him? You maybe think Manny Malhotra. Oh, wait, he left. So he went to Toronto.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting that I think in our preview for this season, I picked Travis Green I picked him for Jack Adams, I believe. Mm-hmm. And it's just the way I see the Canucks is, and this reminds me just of the Blackhawks because we were just talking about them, but that element of a spark where things just get, things start rolling, right? And then you work on it. And for me, when I look back on 2009, that's what I see with Chicago, where, you have the emerging stars, you have the younger guys, but you don't just leave that there. I know that eventually the cap stuff eventually caught up to them, but at the same time, you were able to win before that ended up happening. Like for every Kane or Taves or Keith or Seabrook you had, you also signed a Brian Campbell, you signed a Martin Havlat, you also signed a Marian Hossa, where you bring in these veteran guys that are going to just help establish the core. And I think when I think about a spark, I think about what the Canucks had last year, where things were just going really well. They were finding players that really gelled with what the young core they were establishing. And I think Jim Benning got complacent because two things: he doesn't know how to deal money properly when it comes to managing a team, and second is just I think he relied too much on being lucky at the draft. That I know, he got Brock Besser, he got a Quinn Hughes, he got an Elias Pettersson, and he didn't have a top 3 pick in any of those. And that's not an excuse to become complacent with that kind of core. It's a reason to keep building around it, but in a smart way. Like when I think back on teams that have won, where they had these acceleration of young talent, you don't bring in a Jay Beagle, you don't bring in a Louis Eriksson, you don't bring in Anton Roussel to to surround that type of skill, to surround these types of players that you want to keep growing for your franchise.
Well, sorry, it's just the one thing about Eriksson is too very like just to get the timelines right. Eriksson was brought in before like.
I know. It's just
But Benning's excuse was we still had the Sedins. Hopefully he could have gelled, and he didn't. And the Sedins were
didn't.
32 at the time, so I don't know what he was thinking.
mhm.
I think Daniel said something important there when he compared the Blackhawks and the Canucks. I think the biggest difference between those two teams are that who I don't remember who was running the Blackhawks at the time, if it was Bowman or who his predecessor was.
It was Dale Talon
Dale Talon.
up into 2009, and then Stan Bowman took over 2009, 2010.
So the difference is that number one, Chicago were like a sustained good team for a long time. Plus, when they made bad decisions, they got out of it and somehow fixed it, right? Up until a certain point, then then you're right. I mean, Stan Bowman's made some iffy decisions in recent years, but maybe you have to give up a Teuvo Teravainen, which is an issue. But when you're able to replace that player through drafting, through free agent signings, and like doing it properly, and like actually having a plan instead of having 10 different directions, better management.
It wasn't even that with Chicago though. It was they in their heyday made the tough decisions, not with the young guys. It was with Ladd, it was with Buffalo, Poland as well. The Canucks, stupid. And then of course, yeah, as you say, the Blackhawks then got in trouble when they then committed to the guys. The moment they started committing their older guys and then sacrificed the Teuvo's and the Panarins, that's when everything went south. The Canucks just randomly signed a bunch of older guys who were just, oh, hey, Beagle, you want to cut 4 years? It just, what are you doing? There was no sort of sense here. Now, you talk about, by the way, lucky in drafting, Daniel, and Benning has this sort of idea of patience. He was asked, I don't remember the reporter, so I feel really bad about this, and this is why nowadays as a GM, you should never put a timeline on anything. Benning said when he was hired that there was a 5-year plan. They're now in year 7 of said plan, and they've won 1 playoff round. Yeah, they beat the Blues. That was a playoff round. Play-in doesn't count. Okay, let's forget about that.
Yeah.
They've won 1 round, and it was on the back of Thatcher Demko, which, hey, got them some points in the last few days, but look at their record overall. We'll talk about those games a little later. So the big quote that Benning said that got a lot of people going was that he sees the Canucks being competitive in 2 years. Now, if you look at their cap friendly, the reason that is important is in 2 years, all the bad contracts are gone, actually. I'm going to read you guys a piece of a Thomas Drance article that came after this press conference came out. Because the cap situation for the Canucks in 2 years, and we're looking basically, this would be the 2022-2023 season, is how Benning would line this up. And this is from Thomas Drance's article in The Athletic. Quote, following the 2022-2023 season, the Canucks will have to dole out another significant raise to another piece in Brock Besser, who was due a $7.5 million qualifying offer just to retain his rights that summer. With the Luongo recapture hit and the Eriksson, Russo, Beagle contracts out expiring, that shouldn't be too cumbersome. In fact, the club should have real flexibility that offseason depending on where it lands with Pettersson and Hughes' second deals. That moment in 2 years would be the time to go for it. Doesn't sound too bad. But here's where it gets ugly. That window lasts for only 1 season before both Horvat, who will then be 28, and JT Miller, who will turn 30 during the 2023-2024 season, see their deals expire. Essentially, the Canucks are on pace without significant reorientation to lock themselves into 2 seasons of pain, including this mercifully shortened season, as they handle a wash of inefficient money during the flat cap era. And in exchange for enduring this, they will just have 1 kick at the can for the 23-24 season with their current core group.
That gives me a headache.
That's a lot.
Just thinking about.
What does Horvat make now? Like 5.5?
Yeah. And JT
deal.
And JT Miller 5.25.
By the way, that whole article from Drance is amazing. Everyone should go read it. It's incredible. And then him and Harmon Dial, friend of the show, did a really, really good piece looking at who is untouchable on the Canucks and who is not. It's really funny when you had to throw like Louis Eriksson in there because of his contract.
You know, it's not even just how you're going to pay these players. It's who are you going to fill the rest of your roster with? Like,
Because yeah,
I'm on their cap friendly page. If I'm being honest, the only name that really stands out to me on their reserve list and in the minors is Vasily Podkolzin.
Mhm.
Like, there's a couple guys who I think will be NHL players, in my opinion. But where are you good? Like, you're going to make more signings because you've been so good at free agency?
Exactly.
I kind of feel that too. Like with Polkolzin, there's that added pressure now. Like I know that Niels Hoglander really kind of panned out for them the moment they needed him, but like Polkolzin, I think there's just that added pressure now because he was a top 10 pick, and the way the team's been, it's just like you really got to make sure you hit on that properly now.
I don't think it's the forwards they're going to be in trouble with, though. It's going to be the defense, because who's there? Byers is locked up for a long time.
Nate Schmidt, Quinn Hughes.
And are those
Jordy Ben.
best defensive? Ben will be gone by then.
Yeah.
It's just, no offense to this player, but Olli Levy is not developed, unfortunately, into the defenseman we thought.
That hurt me. Well, not like hurt me, but it just kind of like, it was just those guys that, we become, I think from our Twitch days, remember that? I've become so invested in these reclamation projects that I wanted him to do well.
Yeah.
Here's where you're in a bad situation. When you couldn't move money in the summer to sign Tyler Toffoli, and now you're resorting to potentially trading Jake Virtanen, who's only 24. He's only 24. And I know he's not the top 6 guy we all thought he was going to be when they drafted him. I don't know if that's necessary. I mean, he could be, who knows? But at the moment, it's not looking like that.
I think we were on a real junior high at the time.
Probably.
Yes.
But he's still an NHL player, and he's still 24 years old. That's not the guy you're trying to move. That's when you're in a bad situation.
Little tidbits, by the way. Benning confirmed, obviously, that they are trying to sign Tanner Pearson. Not a bad player. And negotiations with Hughes and Pettersson for their second contracts will start after the trade deadline. He was asked why not start doing it now, and he basically said, "Yeah, we live in the day we have a day." You've all seen it. It's not as bad as we're a team from Dorian, but it's.
Is that not concerning?
That they're waiting? I mean, I wouldn't expect Pettersson and Hughes to want to negotiate anyway.
Sure, but if I'm and this goes back to what happened with Matthews, what happened with Marner, what happened with McDavid, I'm calling their agent July 1st. And maybe he did. I'm not giving him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he did. I'm calling their agent and saying, okay, let's start working on something.
Didn't Hughes switch agencies or Pettersson? Like they went to the same one or something?
I believe it was Pettersson who switched to Hughes' agency.
And there it is. I think it's Newport. Oh, Rip Manuel. Okay.
I'm going to pause it and hopefully it comes back.
We'll be back. Nope. All right. Let me just mute the page again. Okay.
Okay.
All right. 3, 2, 1. All right. We're back. One last thing I want to read you guys about betting, and then we can get going to the Flames here, actually. Just a quote that I wrote down here that Benning said, going back to excuses. Quote, "When we planned this team out in the summer, we were in the Pacific Division. We were going to play every team in the league. With the pandemic and border, it turned out we're just playing the Canadian teams."
That's the dumbest excuse I've
You got to be ready to play anybody.
I hate it so much.
How would this team fare up against Tampa Bay or Boston or Washington?
what?
Worse.
People are taking, by the way, of trying to say the Canadian division is bad. I think instead of trying to point out the bad teams, you need to point out teams like, I can't even remember is it the Central? Is it the West or the Central that has Colorado and Vegas? You know,
That's the West.
the West. You don't measure a division on the bad teams. You measure it on the good ones, all right? And like the Canucks, this record in this division that is so controversial. I mean, you look at the race to the floor in the Canadian division right now. Imagine if McKinnon had his way with this team 7, 8 times, 10. It would be terrible. So they should be like happy they're here, to be honest with you. And then you like talked about like other teams, young players developing. I'm like, man, Pettersson's only a year younger than Matthews. Stop talking about that.
Deal with your own team before you start. Like it was the same thing with Eugene and coming after Toronto. Like, buddy, deal with your own team before you start talking crap about others.
He was complimenting the Leafs.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
by
now
the way,
I'm embarrassed.